Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome to the Adam's Qalb al Mu'min weekly live stream podcast, whatever you want to call this project. We are joined, as we are every week now, with Imam Sayyid Omer. Assalamu alaikum, Imam Omer.
Wa alaikum salam. How are you doing, Saad?
Alhamdulillah, how are you? Ramadan Mubarak, Ramadan Kareem,
Ramadan
Imam
Kareem,
Omer.
Ramadan Mubarak. Ramzan Kareem.
Yeah, Ramzan Kareem.
For the
That's how I roll. I don't do the Ramadan. I don't do the Ramadan. It's just Ramadan for me.
whatever works.
Yep.
Alhamdulillah. How's your Ramadan going?
Alhamdulillah, it is going. I'm traveling. So
Yeah, your backdrop looks different.
yeah, it is. That's my that's the wall in my sister's
Nice.
house. Yeah. So I'm traveling, and because I'm traveling, I've first few fasts I've actually not fasted, but inshallah when I get back I'll be able to fast.
Inshallah.
But how about you? How's Ramzan going in good old Adam Center?
Alhamdulillah, it's going well. Very busy. For those of you who don't know, Adam's Center is open for all 5 daily prayers, and it's open for Taraweeh. And we have a great lineup of imams, reciters, qadis, whatever you want to call them, at all of our locations, actually. So Sterling, Ashburn, Sully, and even Gainesville. We are offering Taraweeh at all the locations. You can come in. You can do the barcode system online to pre-register, or you can register on the spot. The only caveat is first 200 people or 100 people, depending on the location. So get there early.
Get there early, get there often, I guess.
Yes. Some locations are also offering iftar, so that's another
Ooh.
bonus.
Do you know which locations that are
I
offering
believe
iftar?
it's only Sterling right now. Or it might
Okay.
be Sterling and Sully, but you can call and ask her.
Those might be the places to hit up then.
Yeah. And it's good iftar, mashallah.
Alhamdulillah. You know, the iftar is always good.
Yes.
Whenever we did iftar, we'd always that was some good iftar.
Mashallah.
Alhamdulillah.
So yeah, please come if you're watching this and you get this message. Tarawih is open. Just be there early.
And you have to register, right?
Yes, it's better to pre-register. You can register on the spot. It will just take you more time, might cost you a spot, etc. So
Okay.
better to do it online.
And the pre-registration link is at the website.
At the main website, there should be a link right on the main page.
Okay, so that's
to register.
www.adamcenter.org, inshallah. Okay, so Imam Omer, I'm just going to call you Omer because that's
Yeah, no worries, man.
it just feels right. I've
Yeah, I know.
known Omer like since forever, so I knew him before he was the Imam. So
That's true.
It's just okay. So Omer, we're going to be talking inshallah today about connecting with the Quran, right? This is شهر رمضان الذي أنزل فيه القرآن, right?
Qur'an, right.
So this is the month of the Quran, and we released a video this week talking about the Quran. If you haven't checked it out, make sure to check out our YouTube page. Make sure to check out the video that we put out on the YouTube page, where Imam Omer talks about the ways in which you can connect with the Quran.
Right. We had 5 tips or something like that.
Well, you're the one who gave the tips, so you should know.
So it was, I was being, it was 5.
Okay. So now, Imam Omer, if you can give us just a quick rundown of the way the Quran was actually given to the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam in the beginning of this really blessed month, and what that kind of means to us now.
I was about to make a rundown joke from The Office, because there's an episode where he doesn't know what a rundown is. Anyway, sorry, I won't do that. Although I already did. Yeah, alhamdulillah. So it is important to understand where the Quran comes from, as in the life of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And the Quran is not just like a random event where one night Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam is in a cave, and then Jibril comes and, oh hey, start reading. And there's a lot of build up, there's a lot of lead up to that event. So one of the major things, or one of the major events that happens before the revelation of the Quran, that really affects Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam is what the events that lead up to what's called Hilf al-Fudul, which is when, basically, just a really quick 10-second recap, a Yemeni merchant comes to Mecca to trade. A Qurayshi man, a man from the ruling tribe, or the main tribe of Mecca, rips him off badly, right? Takes all of his stuff, basically, and says, well, make me pay you, basically. Like, I'm just going to take your stuff. You don't have any friends here. You don't have any family. This is my town. If you want your money, make me pay you. So the man, he goes to the leaders of Mecca, of Quraysh, and he tells them what happens, and then they actually take a pledge together that, okay, we're never going to let this happen again. This pledge, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, even if I was called to this pledge as a prophet, meaning after Islam, I would have agreed to it. It was such a tremendous pledge. But this really showed something, I think, to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam at that point, which was, hey, we are very different than what we claim to be, meaning we, the Arabs, right? We claim to be people of generosity. We claim to be people of honesty. We claim to be people of bravery. We claim to be all of these things. Clearly, we are not that, right? I mean, helpless guy, coming from thousands of miles away to make an honest living, ripping him off. And the fact that can happen in front of the Kaaba, right, which is like the center of religious life in Arabia, shows a very deep problem. So this starts a process, or an endeavor for the Prophet ﷺ to really find a way to guide his people, right? And I think, I don't know the exact age he was, but he's in his 30s, obviously, maybe mid to late 30s. And so Rasulullah ﷺ starts actually retreating to the caves around Mecca regularly. And some even mention over a number of years, right? So he'll go once a month for maybe a week at a time, sometimes 2 weeks at a time. And he will retreat, and he will just be alone. He's looking for guidance. He's basically looking for Allah, to help the situation. And he's worried about his people. He wants to guide his people. And this goes on for years until Jibril alayhi salam finally comes to him. Right. So the idea that it was just like, oh, okay, he's the age of 40. He decides, I'm going to go, up to the cave and just retreat for a bit. There's a whole process happening behind the scenes, right? Or that we haven't seen, or we don't really talk about, that as the Quran describes, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, it's as if you might kill yourself. Like you would harm yourself if they don't follow your guidance, right? لَعَلَّكَ بَاخِعٌ نَفْسَكَ, right? That was the Prophet before he was a prophet. Like, he was so concerned for his people even before he was a prophet, that he was taking these retreats and just trying to figure out how to solve their problems. So the Quran comes in that context. It's the answer to the call for guidance. Hence why, Baqarah starts with ذَلِكَ الْكِتَابُ لَا رَيْبَ فِيهِ هُدًى. It's a source of guidance. So and also, I think one of my teachers mentions, Sheikh Faisal, who you know as well, Faisal Matadar, mentions that the Quran is very unique for the Arabs because these are not a people who write. Right? It's just not a thing. No one writes anything. So the fact that there's a book, is a big deal. One, two. I mean, I know you're studying this stuff now in Georgetown in your PhD program. Jahili poetry is really wild, isn't it? Jahili poetry is crazy.
Yeah, that's an understatement.
Yeah,
it's
I like to draw comparisons to modern rap music. It's very similar in the boasting
for our viewers, when he says jahili poetry is the poetry that is written or composed by the Arabs before the advent of Islam.
right before Islam. So I mean, these guys are crazy. They're just like, my tribe is the best. We're gonna kill you. We're gonna do this. Or my camel is this, and I'm gonna take your woman. And it's wild, right?
Absolutely wild. I mean, it is really like the epic rap battles of the
Yeah.
Arab Arabian desert.
And so Sheikh Faisal was saying, the Quran is like the first thing in in the Arabic language that we can find or identify that actually talks about something other than this stuff. It's like the first non-rap music in the Arabian Peninsula. Like, people are not talking about anything other than my tribe is this and my tribe is that. And we're gonna fight you and we're gonna do this. So like the fact that you first have like discourse, like actual ethical discourse, like, okay, what does it mean to be a good person? What is God? What is the nature of God? What is the nature of reality? I mean, this was actually shocking to the people. Like, oh, like, we have never actually discussed these things. you know so the Quran is and that's why when we hear stories about the Sahaba being like perplexed or like struck, like, oh my god, what is this that I'm listening to? It's because they had literally never heard anything like it before in that language, right? So yeah, that's some of the context I want everyone to understand this, that the Quran is not, a'udhu billah, an accident, right? It comes in a very specific context in a very specific time and with a specific purpose, although the purpose is not limited to that time. We do still believe it applies to us in this day and age, but um it's the answer to a call, a call for help, a call for guidance, a call for rectifying people. That's what the Prophet ﷺ wanted to do. He wanted people to change. He wanted people to become better. Like, the Arabs always claim we're the descendants of Ibrahim, we're the descendants of Ismail alayhi salam. But you don't act like it at all, right? That was the Prophet ﷺ's point. Like, you need to start acting like it.
And in the Rasul's entire life, and even before his birth, I mean, he was being prepared for that moment of revelation.
Right.
So I mean, whether it was his birth, whether it was the expedition of Abraha to the Kaaba, whether it was all these things, it was his entire life was a kind of leading up to that moment of revelation, because he is Al Mustafa, he is the chosen one.
The chosen one, right?
He is.
And I'm really glad you brought up Abraha, because that was like a straight up miracle that all the people of Mecca witnessed together, right? And this is just a number of decades before the corruption just seeps back in, So, and that's why the Quran tells us, like, hey, didn't you guys see that? Like, that wasn't so long ago. Many of you that are hearing this now literally saw that, and yet you're still, devolving back into your old ways. So it's a wake up call, and that's really what the Quran is. It's a shock to the system. We talked about this in the last podcast, like a shock to the system. And that's why fasting and the Quran, I think, go together really well, right? Fasting is like that physical shock that you need, and the Quran is like that spiritual shock that you need.
So now, when we talk about the Quran as a kind of a wake up call, or we talk about the Quran as a way of invigorating the person, one of the ways we kind of have to bring this in is we can talk about the Quran in an abstract sense, but the Quran is not meant to be experienced in an abstract sense, right? One of the things I love to say is there's a lot of people my age who love to who love to read about the Quran, but they don't love to read the Quran.
Yeah, it's a really, really good way of putting it. It's turned into I don't even know what the right like parallel is, but that you put it like perfectly. Like, the Quran is direct. You can read the Quran as directly addressed to you, right? When the Quran says, "Ya ayyuhal muzammil," right? Oh, you who are covered up, right? Get up and pray, right? You don't have to look at that as, oh well, what's the symbolism of this and what? get up and pray. And that's what it's telling you to do, right? Um, I mean, this is gonna sound kind of weird, but like, unless you can't take the Quran literally, and this is actually a rule in tafsir, unless you cannot take it literally, take it literally. Like if the Quran is telling you to do something, it's telling you to do it. It's not a code for, okay, we'll find, the secret meaning behind the significance of. So you're right. I mean, we love to like, we're dancing around like, the fence, or we're dancing around the bush, and we're not like diving into it, which is what the Sahaba, I mean, when the Sahaba were hearing these things, they were like, oh, the Quran says don't approach the prayer while you're drunk. Okay, I guess that's over. Like, it's not like, oh, drunkenness. What is drunkenness? Let's think about this.
But what's even more interesting is the Sahaba were listening to and reading the ayah, لا تقربوا الصلاة وأنتم سكارى, right?
Right.
Whereas I I almost feel like sometimes we take the Quran as an issue of identity, where it's like, oh, I will read about all of the miracles of the Quran. I will read about the history of the Quran. I will read about
Right.
this and that of the Quran, but my Quran will never come off my shelf.
Yeah. I see what
Because
you're saying.
believing all these things about the Quran becomes a part of my Muslim identity, but
Right.
actually reading the Quran is a spiritual activity.
Right. I mean, and I don't know how to politely put this, so I'll just say it bluntly. We treat the Quran as if it's a man-made document a lot of times. We don't really treat it as if this. I mean, this is literally revelation from Allah, right? The words that you're reading, reciting, listening to, those words were chosen by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The exact wording, the exact sound. And that's what they say the difference is between, the Quran and Hadith Qudsi. They're both messages from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but one of them is the Prophet sallallahu choosing the words, right? So he's choosing how to relay this thought. Whereas in the Quran itself, like, it's just to look at it, read it, listen to it is automatically an act of worship, because this is something Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala chose, right? The wording, the sound, even the audio experience, right? That's something that Allah intended for us. So you're absolutely right. We want to know the history, and we want to know who are the commentators, and look how tafsir developed here, and this and that, and there's this esoteric tafsir and this. But you're right, we don't actually just like let the Quran speak to us directly. And I think that's a lot of the reason why people don't feel like they can connect to the Quran, because we very rarely actually engage just the Quran, right? Like, pick up the Quran and just read it, and let it speak to you. I mean, that experience in and of itself is what transformed, for example, Umar, right? Radiallahu anhu. Picking up Taha and reading the opening verses of Taha, that shook him to the core, right? And he was like, oh wow, this is something, this is different, this isn't like anything I've ever experienced before. So he let the Quran speak to him. It wasn't going around asking people, "Hey, what's your thoughts on this?" And that prophet's revealing this, and he said this and this one. You're man, you hit it. I can't say it any better than that. We have to experience the Quran directly.
And one of the things that saddens me is that I feel like one of the practices that have fallen out is the practice of having awrad of Quran.
Yeah.
Of just and I get it to a sense that there's the world is busy now. The world is it's a really, really busy world, and we don't have the same kind of reading fluency of the Quran that a lot of times that we used to, because the education that we've gotten, right? This is part of the really sad reality of the world, where our English reading is far better than our reading of the Quran. And it's a lot easier for us to read a book about the Quran than it is to actually read the Quran, just because of our education.
Yeah.
And so I understand all of that, but at the same time, there's a certain amount of we still have to have a a feeling of an importance of the tilawa of Quran,
Yeah.
of the
Absolutely.
recitation of Quran, right? Because the Yusuf Ali is not the word of Allah, right?
Right. Exactly.
Marmaduke Pickthall is not the word of Allah.
Right. Exactly.
Muhammad Asad is not the word of Allah. The word of Allah is
It's
Qul huwallahu ahad.
the word of Allah.
You
Exactly.
know,
There's this really cool documentary. If anyone ever gets a chance to find it, it was actually done by HBO, but it's called oh, what's it called? It's about the Quran, or it's like I'll find it out. I'll let us know next time. But there's a documentary about the Quran. There's an international competition that used to happen in Cairo every year. I think we may have even watched this together. But these kids, they follow these three kids from different parts of the world, and these kids come to Cairo to compete in this competition. And what's really cool
Quran
in
by
that
heart.
Quran by Heart. There, exactly. Quran by Heart. It was done by HBO. If you can find it, watch it, especially during Ramadan. Like, it will move you, inshallah. It's really, really well done. But one of my favorite parts of that movie is they have a non-Muslim uh, expert on tilawa of the Quran. She actually wrote a book on it. And they interview her, and she's actually living in Cairo, I think, and she attends and she sees all that stuff. But I mean, she said something really profound, which stuck to me for a while. Was she said, when you're listening to the Quran, you're not just listening to a book, you're listening to a moment of revelation. Right? You're listening to a moment of revelation. So that's why she was saying, like, I think the question that was asked to her was something like, why do the Muslims take this as so sacred? Like, what is so significant about it, et cetera? And just she's, before that, she's analyzing the melody of the reciters and et cetera, et cetera. But then she says that statement's very profound, right? We're not reading a book. This is not like picking up Shakespeare or Canterbury Tales and, oh, look at this. Oh, Shakespeare's trying to tell us this thing through the play, right? Oh, like this symbolizes this and this symbolizes that. This is not that, right? This is a moment of revelation, and it is heavy. The Quran called itself heavy, right? Qawlan thaqila. This is a heavy statement, or a heavy text. So you're right that, like, it's tough, especially in this day and age. We commute for so long. Well, maybe not in Corona, but we used to commute for so long. We have so many things to do. We gotta take our kids here. We gotta go to soccer camp or whatever. And all those things are good. There's nothing. I mean, those things are good to do, but while we're doing those things, we shouldn't like do that at the expense of teaching our kids to read the Quran, or even teaching ourselves. Right? A lot of us don't know. We don't know how to recite the Quran properly. I honestly, in my job, like, I come across that almost on a daily basis. Like, as many kids as I have that want to learn Quran, I have just as many adults that are like, "Hey, I need help reciting." Um, and it is, we like. I was actually talking about this yesterday with someone, and I remember looping you in on this. We had this discussion about witr, right, and sunnah muakkada and stuff. Um, and the person I was talking to was like, "Oh man, like, that's difficult," like, like, and the immediate response I gave is, "Yeah, it is. It is difficult. I mean, there's a level of difficulty that we have to accept, right?" And that's why there's such a big payoff at the end, right? Or that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is so, inshallah, generously going to reward us beyond what we ever deserve, because it's not easy, right? But you have to make that sacrifice. Like, that's what obedience to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is. Like, it's not just like a cakewalk. I mean, alhamdulillah, like, our deen, subhanallah, is so much easier than some other deens, like some other adyan, the people of the past. Like, when the Sahaba heard about the Bani Israel, they were like, "Oh man, we're glad we weren't them." Like, because some of the, I mean, the Prophet would tell them stories of how some people in Bani Israel literally fasted for their entire lives, right? Worshipped for their entire lives, and that's actually the context behind Laylatul Qadr, which we'll talk about, in a few weeks. Like the Prophet like the revelation of Laylatul Qadr came to him because the Sahaba were basically like, okay, well, we're never going to catch up to those guys. We've been Muslim for 5 years, 10 years, right? Like that's another thing we have to think about. The Sahaba experienced the Quran in such a short time. Many of us have been Muslim for longer than the Sahaba were, right? But the zeal, the energy, the commitment they had to the Quran is like astronomical, right? Whereas we have the resources. One of I think Imam Majid said it, or I don't remember who said it, but like, I mean, you have a talking Quran on your phone like you have a reciter in your pocket, not just one, dozens of reciters, right, in your pocket at any given time. In the time of I think of Sayyidina Ali radiallahu ta'ala anhu, I think it was Ali, there were two mushafs in the world, in the entire world. There was a single mushaf, like official mushaf in Medina, and there's a single mushaf in Mecca, right?
That was probably before the Uthmani mushafs, because by the
I think so.
yeah. So that's probably during
there
the
were
time
literally
of,
there were
yeah.
two. So if you wanted to learn the Quran, well, either you have someone who knows it, or you go to Mecca or Medina, and then those are the only places. And now we have, I mean, I have different riwayat on my phone. I have reciters in different riwayat on my phone. It's unheard of. Like we have so much access, but our hearts need to connect, right? They need to be there.
And
Did I say Ali?
yeah,
I don't think I meant to say Ali. Sorry, I made a mistake.
I think that there's also a couple of things here. Is that one, the world has shifted, right?
Yeah.
The world has definitely shifted. So one of the very important things to remember is we're constantly being told, like, oh, like you have to put your energies here, right?
Yeah.
So we have people who go into medical school for like 3 years and then go into residence programs and whatnot the other, and for like 7 years they're doing like 12, 13 hour a day nonstop,
Right.
entirely just to become doctors, right?
Right.
Same to become lawyers, and you have people who are like doing this type of stuff, and nobody like turns around and tells them, oh, that's too difficult.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? Because there's an idea that there's value in this,
Yeah.
right? Because the world has shifted, and the priorities of the world have shifted,
Yeah.
right? And we kind of have to. I feel like we kind of have to understand that the priorities of the world have shifted, and when we talk to people about things like reciting Qur'an and Taraweeh and Nawafil and whatnot, we also have to have an understanding that they're living in that world,
Yeah.
right? And so, just like you build up a muscle in a body,
Yeah.
right? You understand that somebody like me, right? I'm a straight up couch potato, right? I'm sitting in front of my computer 10 hours a day.
Right.
I go to the gym and I put on giant
and
weights. I'm gonna hurt
It's
myself.
your work too, right? It's your work, and like everything's tied to our devices. And
Exactly, right? Like especially during Corona, right? Like I used to walk
exactly.
a mile just because the parking at Georgetown. The parking at Georgetown is terrible. The parking in Georgetown is terrible.
Seems to be universal at every college. You think they'd figure that out by now? No.
Oh my God. Anyways, well, if the parking was good anywhere, then you would commute, and then they wouldn't make money on the dorms.
That's true.
Yeah. So
Separate discussion.
yeah. Don't want me to start on the college complex. But so the what was I talking about? Yeah. So if I go into a gym and I start lifting big weights, I'm gonna hurt myself.
Yeah.
Right?
Exactly.
And I think it's the same when it comes to Quran and
Hmm.
Taraweeh and
Hmm.
Adhkar and Sunnahs and whatnot. The other, we're all couch potatoes.
Yeah.
We're all spiritual couch potatoes. And
This,
so, go for it.
no, so this ties back to what you mentioned before. I forgot to talk about the concept of awrad, right, or the concept of a wird. And for those of you who don't know what the word means, a wird is basically like a daily habit, right? Um, there's actually really cool symbolism to that word, though, warada, because it actually, like, a mawrid is a place where you go regularly to get your water, right? So the act of doing a wird is like, oh, in the Arabian linguistic context, it's like going to get your water every day, right? It's like the thing you have to do in order to survive, right? And I think that's like, if we approach it that way, like, the yes, I mean, we talk about value a lot, you and I, like, we people really like, if it's not something tangible in your hand right now, people are not motivated. Like, it's not a thing, right? Like, we're all about immediate profit, immediate value. But I mean, the Quran tells us, one of the things one of my teachers told me, um he said, it was like one of his, not a miracle of the Quran, but like a really amazing aspect of the Quran, is he said there's not a single page in the Quran, every page, there's not a single page in the Quran where the afterlife is not mentioned, or death is not mentioned, or the grave is not mentioned, or basically Yom al Qiyam, anything like that. Every single page of the Quran reinforces this, that, hey, um, this life is temporary. This is not everything. We all have to pass. We all have to meet Allah. We're all going to be accountable, and there's an ultimate destination, right? So I think for many of us, we, like, intellectually, we know that, but also, like, our society doesn't really force us to come to grips with that, right? Like, that's such a far remove. Like, it's morbid, it's taboo. Like, oh, you don't talk about. Whereas, I mean, I think in the time of the Sahaba, and not even back then, like so far back then, even 100 years ago or so, like, I mean, death was a very present reality, no matter where you were. If you were living in the woods of Minnesota and in a log cabin, like, you got to be careful, because there are animals in the forest that can kill you. You know, and there's diseases, and there's this and that, and the frost, and if you don't get enough food in the summer, and etc. So, like, we live in such a comfortable kind of bubble that we don't actually think about the things the Quran is telling us. I think that's part of it. And like you said, you don't go to the gym and pick up 75 pounds and start just curling it. You're gonna break your arm, right? So the concept of awrad is, let me set, right, a daily allowance, that, like, I need to force myself, just like if I need to go get water to survive. Let me come up with something that's feasible for me, but that I do consistently, right? And this, we talked about this in the video, actually, that the most beloved action to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. The most beloved action to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is that which is most consistent, even if it's small, right? The key is a consistency. So let's say you are a medical student, and you are doing 13, 14, 15 hours a day, whatever. Even if you just do 5 hours a day, 5 minutes, 5 hours, 5 minutes of recitation, well, what's 5 minutes, right? 5 minutes is the time it takes for us to, like, we probably spend 20, 30 minutes a day just checking our phones, not even responding, but just like picking up our phones and looking and flipping through, right? Even if you do 5 minutes a day, but you do it consistently, like, that's infinitely better than opening up the Quran once a year, right? When Ramadan rolls around. And even then, for like the first 3 days or 4 days, and it's back to our normal habits. It's really like, it's a reprioritization, reorientation that we need. And it starts young, right? And this is something that, like, many of the scholars have talked about. Like, you have to put these habits into your kids when they're young, right? And you have to lead by example. You can't just be like, hey, pick up the Quran, read 5 minutes. Like, do it together, right? Do it with your kids. Do it after the prayer. For example, when you're praying with your kids, pick up the Quran, say, hey, look, let's read a page together, or let's read 2 pages together. When you instill that habit, right? And like I remember things. I remember Ayatul Kursi because my grandmother taught it to me when I was like 4, you know? And so like I've learned that, and she taught me, like, I'll have mercy on her, after every prayer, let's recite it together, right? So like I still remember that, like have fond memories of Ayatul Kursi going back to my grandmother. So when you do that and when we talked about this in the video as well, doing things collectively, it's much more powerful than doing things individually too. And I think we'll talk about that later in the podcast too.
And on top of that, there's so much. Going back to this weird concept and this concept of doing something small but consistently, you can also kind of there's another concept of taking something small and doing it consistently until it's become easy,
Yeah,
and then you can build it up.
exactly.
There's this, uh, you know, everybody knows this from dieting, right?
Yeah.
Everybody wants to go on the crash diet, so you you want to lose that like 30 pounds in 3 weeks. And
Right,
so you're like, I'm not going to eat anything for like 3 weeks.
Just drink orange juice and something, and eat
Exactly.
kale. Yeah. 3 weeks.
Oh man, I hate kale. Okay. And then like within a week you're done. You can't do it anymore, and then your weight skyrockets back up, right?
Yeah, exactly.
It's just not going to work, and it's the same thing with Quran, with adhkar, with salah, with anything. You're like, I'm going to read my 95 sunnahs, and then you do it the first day, and then next day you're done.
You're out.
It ain't happening again, right? But you can build that up slowly, right? And so it's the same thing with the Quran. Start reciting, 5 minutes,
Right.
and then until that becomes easy.
Yeah. It
And
becomes
then
a
you
habit.
can add another 2-3 minutes until that
Right.
becomes easy. You know,
It's not a race.
it's exactly,
That's the
exactly. It's not a race, because at the end of the day, we what are, who what are we trying to prove, right? What are we trying to prove? If we're doing something for the value and the merit of itself, right? Then we can just do it for its own, for the way that it brings the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to us,
Right.
right? For the pleasure of Allah. And that 5 minutes of the pleasure of Allah in our lives, right, is value in and of itself.
Right.
And then we can increase that. But like if we're doing it to race, or to like, oh, it makes me feel good, and,
Get
or
over
like
with.
some,
Yeah.
that's something entirely different.
I mean, when you're doing it that way, you're already stressed and tense to begin with, right? Because your goal is just, I need to get this over with. Like it's as if we have this, like, I think a lot of people recite Quran because they, how do you put it? Like if they don't do that 5 minutes, oh, something bad's gonna happen to me, right? It goes back to value in a lot, in some ways. Like if I don't do this, like my job is, or my commute will be bad. Like there's almost like superstitious attitude we have sometimes. In the Quran, I mean, yes, we are like, we have to balance fear of Allah and hope in Allah, right? You can't be too far in either extreme. You can't just live with complete fear, and you can't just live with complete hope and not do anything. But like for many of us, it's like the reciting the Quran doesn't become a pleasurable act, right? Because we're like, oh, if I don't do this, like, what's gonna happen? Like you shouldn't approach the Quran out of this force of like stress, or somehow this is gonna, like solve all my problems, and nothing's gonna like, nothing's gonna affect me. It's almost like we're doing it's like kind of like a talisman or something. Um, that's not the point of the Quran, you know. Like the point, as you said, is like this is something meant to connect you to Allah, right? It's and this is what the scholars used to call it, kalam Allah, or the Quran itself. It's kalam, right? Kalam is communication, right? The word kalama means actually to pierce, right? So like it's something that's meant to pierce you, like pierce your mind, get into your thoughts, your you should be thinking about what you read. I remember vividly because we were both in Jordan, and I remember when I first got to Jordan to study Arabic, I was so lost, and I remember months go by and months go by and months go by, and one day I'm in the masjid, and the imam is reciting, and I vividly remember hearing and understanding my first verse, and then I was like, "Whoa!" Like I didn't need a translation for that. I didn't need, like I didn't need to think about that. I heard it and I understood it, and I was like, "Wow, that was powerful," you know. And so like doing like understanding that Allah is communicate like how like amazing is it that Allah is communicating to us, right? Um, and we I mean, we're going about our daily lives, but like still Allah is calling us out there, like he's throwing that rope to us. So you have to approach it the right way. And I think we were going to talk about this concept of approaching the Quran, right? Like, how do you approach it, right? Don't approach it as, it's another chore I have to do. Don't approach it as, oh, Ramadan, race to finish, get it over with, like I have to do it so my year has barakah or something like that. As one of my teachers said, this is a letter from Allah. When you receive a letter from a friend, you open it up, you're excited, you're like, oh, let me see what's going on. Let me, like you pour over it, you read it again and again and again. Although now people don't send letters anymore, but now it's like if you get a letter, it's like, oh my God, I got a letter, right? Which is actually good because that's kind of what it should be like. Man, this
Well,
is a letter from
if
Allah, right?
if I got a letter now, I would think something is terribly wrong.
Yeah. Well, yeah, unfortunately. We don't we don't pour over our emails, unfortunately.
No, we don't. Unless something is terribly wrong.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, we have to approach it in the right way. Don't like I'm not going to say don't read the Quran, but what I mean to say is like don't turn it into this bothersome chore that I have to get rid of, you know? Um read it because you want to connect. You're looking for a connection to Allah, and you want to like your niyyah, like how we have niyats, like we have intentions before we do our actions, right? We have to make an intention also when we open up the Quran, right? Just like before we start to pray, you make an intention, whether you say it out loud or you say it in your mind. Oh, I'm praying for rakats of asr, fard, et cetera, et cetera. Like you state what you're doing, or like you understand what it is you're doing. We need to do the same thing when we open up the Quran. Like, hey, what am I actually doing here, right? Like, oh, you need to say in your mind, oh Allah, this is your book. I'm here to read it. I'm here to understand it. I'm here to connect to you. Please help me, or something like that. Like when you state that out, like this is something I've learned a little bit now in counseling and these kind of things, like the concept of affirmations, right? It's very powerful to actually state something, to actually like physically, like hear it being said. And that's why people kind of laugh at it, but like affirmations are actually very powerful for some people, to hear something said, like, oh, I have value, I'm this, I'm that. Just to hear that, or to have that internal dialogue, is very powerful. So we also need to make intentions when we approach the Quran.
Well, that's what we were taught when we were kids. We were praying Jadakat namaz,
Yeah,
Farz,
exactly.
Zohar.
It's like a formula you have to check off.
Yeah, that's what we were taught. That was very much affirmation for every namaz.
Exactly.
But and then when I grew up and I went to study fiqh, and was like, yeah, actually, you don't have to do that. It's just niyyah is all in your head. And I was like, what?
You kind of understand why they made you do that, right? Like It's good. I mean, I don't view it as a bad
Oh no,
thing.
for sure, for sure. I totally understand why. It was just it was mind blowing.
Oh
I
yeah.
was like I felt my entire world was a lie.
Alhamdulillah. Uh,
Okay. But yeah, I totally get that. The idea of reading Quran for the sake of connecting with Allah Subhanahu wa Taala
mhm.
as a form of ibadah,
Yeah. Mhm.
as a form of you know
It's a
that inherent value and connection,
yeah.
and not as a means of something worldly.
Right. And not as a chore either,
But there's another thing that's very important to kind of talk about, and that is we only have 15 minutes, and
Right.
I know
Yeah.
that you have a lot to say about this, and I have a lot to say about this,
Yeah.
and that's the concept of contemplating on the Quran.
Yeah.
So how how do you there's a lot that's said about the idea of contemplation,
Hmm.
and I feel like there's a lot that's good about it, and there's a lot of
Hmm.
misconceptions about the idea of contemplation in the Quran.
Right. I mean, even when we were discussing this, like, a little while ago, we had totally different ideas of what contemplation is, because when I hear contemplation, I think of like what we call this in Arabic, they call it ishara, right? You have ishara and you have tafsir, and they're very different things, right? So for me, when I hear contemplation, I think of ishara, which is like, oh, this symbolizes this and this symbolizes that, and this is the ayah is talking about this concept and this abstraction, and don't get me wrong, there are books of ishara. They're not taken very seriously, but there there are books of ishara in Arabic. Um, but the authors that do that very clearly state this is ishara. This is not tafsir. Don't like go read a tafsir book if you really like want to, like it's just like the person's like personal, that although these are shuyukh, these are alims that are doing this, but they very clearly state this is a book of ishara. Um, it's not meant to be taken that seriously, right? And then you had a totally different idea of contemplation, right? What was your idea?
Well, I mean, my idea of contemplation is basically there's a lot of people who feel the Quran talking to them very powerfully,
Mm-hmm.
right? And they want to draw conclusions
Mm.
from what they feel the Quran is telling them,
Yeah.
right? And they want to draw conclusions in things like in aqidah, in like in
Yeah.
belief
Yeah.
systems, and they want to draw conclusions in in their own personal, mostly their personal beliefs and whatnot,
Yeah.
based on like they take a verse, right? They'll take a verse and they'll sit down and they'll read it again and again and again, and they'll try to like look for meanings in this word and this word and this word, and
Yeah.
say like, okay, this is what I believe the Quran is telling me,
Yeah.
and they'll try to like find meanings for that in their life, and meanings for that in their
Yeah.
beliefs, and meanings for that in their uh, and that often leads to that is what like they feel is contemplating on the Quran.
Yeah. And this is a very kind of modern approach, not just to the Quran, but to religion, right? When you approach it, how do you say this like correctly? When you approach a sacred text with your own preconceived notions, and the reason you're reading the text is to confirm your preconceived notions, you're doing it wrong, right? Um, and you're right. A lot of people do that with the Quran. It's like, I believe this. Let me find a way to justify it through the Quran, right? Or let me find something that agrees with my, whatever belief I have or thought I have. And I mean, that's against the first rule of contemplation, right? The
But
first
a lot
rule
of
of,
times though, they don't even realize that they're doing that.
yeah, exactly.
They don't even realize that's how they're approaching the Quran. Is
Hmm.
that they're looking for their own their own conceptions, their own assumptions within the Quran. They think that that's already in the Quran, and it's
Right.
speaking to them. But actually, what
Well,
they're finding is their preconceived notions.
yeah. Oh yeah, as Cicero said, who will watch the Watchmen?
Well, exactly, exactly.
Um, yeah, I mean, and this, I mean, this is partially a fault of us. Like, we who work in Islamic education or religious education need to do a better job clarifying these things. But like, the first rule of contemplation is, and it's the same as the first rule of debate in like Islamic debate. You don't go in with the idea that like, um, let me rephrase it. You go in with the goal of finding the truth, right? Or finding like, you approach it where you want the text to present itself to you, not you inserting yourself in the text, right? Um, that's the first rule of contemplation. The first rule is let the Quran speak. Okay, let it say what it wants to say, right? And then just think about it. And not even just you really think about it. Look at what the people of the past said about it. Look at what the scholars of tafsir said about it. And it's really like amazing to me. Like, one of the earliest tafsirs is Tafsir Tabri, right? Um, I love Tafsir Tabri because even though Tabari is so close, I think he's 3rd century. He's pretty early, right? He's so close to the time of the like, he's much closer to the Salaf Salih, the righteous, the generations following the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. But like, even in his time, his approach to tafsir was, well, I'm just gonna quote hadith, and I'm just gonna say like, I think, and he even says, I think personally this is the correct way to do it. Like, so you have this like this reverence that he has for the Quran and the hadith literature, and he's not even saying his own opinion. Like, he's like, well, this is what was said. I just think this one is what I prefer. So the closer you get to the Salaf Salih, you get this attitude that like, hey, it's not me, like, I'm not the main person here. I'm just trying to convey what I've, what essentially the Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam said.
I think one of the issues that we end up having is that none of us have taken tafsir classes, none of us have taken hadith classes, none of us have taken those classes. We've all taken English classes, and we all sit down. One of our things we do in English classes, we take a poem. And
You're
we
an
sit
English
down.
major, right?
I'm an English major, yeah.
Yeah, so you can tell us directly.
Yeah, I mean, but like, remember your high school English class, right?
Yeah.
They taught you to take a poem, look at it, and be like, okay, what does this line mean? And then you look for symbols, and you look for metaphors, and you don't want it there. It's exactly the way we treat Quran.
Right, exactly.
We treat Quran like a piece of literature.
Yeah.
And then we go in and we look for the metaphors and the symbols and this and the whatnot, and then we write a journal entry on what the Quran means to me. But the Quran is not a piece of literature.
Right.
Right. The Quran is a direct message from Allah.
Right.
Right. And so the contemplation on a direct message from Allah is very different from contemplation on a poem from Shakespeare.
Right. And you have to approach it as a conversation, right? Like, I'm not gonna sit and when you're talking to me, and I'm gonna be like, oh, what's the what does he mean when he says this? Saad said this word. What's the symbol of that word? Like, we don't do this when we talk to people, right? But we do it when Allah's talking to us. Like, oh, what does this mean? So, like, I think one of the first rules of tafsir that you learn is like, if a thing can be taken literally, as I mentioned this, you take it literally, unless it can't, right? Like, there's no reason to jump behind, and this is what the Quran talks about when it criticizes ta'wil,
And
trying to find,
because the assumption in tafsir is God is talking to you, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is talking to you, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is sending a book of guidance, right? Whereas our assumption is basically taking the Quran as literature.
Yeah, exactly.
And literature is an artistic, poetic form, right? Which the Quran expressly says it is not.
There's a I'm just remembering a story I read about an author. I forget. Was it? Was it? I forget who it was. Maybe Faulkner or someone who uh, he got. He was attending a class. Okay, I think he was attending a class on his own book. Okay, like a book he wrote, right? And they're talking about, oh, he means this when he says this, and he means this, and this is the symbolism of this, and he says, no, I don't think that's what's meant here. And then he's the author, and then the professor say, hey, what do you know? Like, like you don't know this. Like, the author is telling you what I mean, and he's like, no, that's not what it means at all. It means something totally different. You're like, that's kind of, in a way, that's what we're doing, right?
And I'm not really anti contemplation. I just
No,
I
of
just
course not.
I just feel like when we contemplate on the Quran, right? The way that we contemplate has to be kind of seeing the conversation as one of ubudiyah,
Yeah, exactly.
and one of, okay, what is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala telling me
Yeah,
to, how to, how should I be creating my relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? How should I be
right.
like, how should my ubudiyah to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala be? How should my like my servitude to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala be? Because when we start going down this route of literizing the Quran,
Yeah,
then one, we've completely obfuscated, like turned into like blurred the Quran,
yeah,
right? And two, we've made entirely meaningless its original purpose,
yeah, exactly.
which was
Guidance.
guidance.
Guidance. Yeah.
Why would, like, sure, the Quran has many meanings,
Mm-hmm.
but the clear purpose of the Quran was to guide people.
Right.
And if the true meaning of the Quran was hidden behind all of these layers,
Right.
then it would be, like the main purpose of the Quran would be like not served by that
No,
fact.
not at all. The Sahaba wouldn't have become who they became. And I think we're going to talk about this today. It was like the best form of contemplating or acting up, like the best thing you can do. And as I told you, this is going to sound really controversial. The best thing you can do is not just limit your interaction with the Quran to just reading it. Don't just read it for the sake of reading it and then not do anything else. The Sahaba, when they heard these things, they immediately put it into practice. That's one of the meanings of contemplating the Quran. Living it. You gotta live it. You gotta do it, right? When the Quran says don't backbite. Oh yeah, backbiting is really bad. Oh, it reminds me of this time when this and then you go and you go backbiting. Like, we contemplate for a second. Yeah, backbiting is bad. That's right. Hey, so did you hear what this guy did and that guy did? Like, um, in the time of the Sahaba, this word hafiz, like, it means so many things, right? Like, throughout history, it's meant so many things. Interestingly, in the time of the Sahaba, a hafiz meant someone who uh, implemented all of the rules of Surah Baqarah and Surah Al Imran, because those two surahs have obviously many, many rules, right? A person who implemented all of that was called a hafiz. So they were seen as someone protecting the Quran through their actions, right? Through the things they did. And we obviously have the famous hadith from Sayyidah Aisha anha, that the character of the Prophet ﷺ was the Quran, right? So it wasn't as if the Prophet ﷺ was just preaching and just like, hey, listen to this and hear what I have to say, but he was actually doing it. He was leading by example. It was put into practice, right? And that's really what the Quran is telling us to do. Like, it is telling us, go look at the sign and go look at this. And most of the surahs we read are those types of surahs, the sun and the moon, etc. But the Quran is a, like, it's meant to rectify your conduct as well, right? The Prophet said, I was only sent to teach you makarim al akhlaq, like the best forms of conduct, right? And we find that in the Quran. And as I mentioned previously, and I think I mentioned in the video as well, the Quran tells you how the best people dealt with the worst situations, right? So learn from, like, don't just look at the story of Yusuf as like, oh, this is an allegory for this and this and this and this. No, look what Yusuf alayhi salam did. These are like his brothers tried to kill him and this, and like, how did he treat them? How did he interact with them? How did he have mercy on the people in the prison? How did he, like, uh this is when I get a lot people ask me, hey, like, when I'm trying to volunteer or when I'm applying for a job, people have this like, oh, can I like boast about myself, or can I have like that confidence about myself? Because we have this idea like, if you're a Muslim, you have to be like, oh, no, I'm nothing, I don't I can't do anything. We have this false modesty problem, right? And I always point to Surah Yusuf. What does Yusuf alayhi salam say? He says, put me on the khaza'in. I'll head the resources. I am Hafid and I am Alim. I'm trustworthy. And I'm not, I know this thing. Like, he has that confidence to do it, right? So like, learn from that. That's something you can implement. If you're sure about something, like, hey, I can handle this. Khalas. Don't be like, no, I'm nothing. You know me. I can't stand false modesty.
I have the best story about nothing. I'm nothing. So there's a guy who's in the at the masjid, and he's a musalli. He's praying, and he has this amazing moment of clarity, and he falls to the floor, and he says, "I'm nothing. I'm nothing." And so the muadhin sees him, and he's greatly affected by it, and he falls to the floor, and he goes, "I'm nothing. I'm nothing." So the imam sees him, and he comes running, and he falls to the floor, and he says, "I'm nothing, I'm nothing." And so the janitor sees him, and he runs to them, and he falls to the floor, and he says, "I'm nothing, I'm nothing." So the muadhin looks at the imam and says, "Huh, look who thinks he's nothing."
I've heard this story. This is a Juha story, isn't it?
It's so great.
You think you're nothing. I'm the one that's nothing. I remember that. Yeah. I mean, the conduct is like, I think one of the most beautiful things in the Quran that I've come across, like that I've thought about recently, is Surah Luqman, right? What is Surah Luqman? It's a conversation between a father and a son. How many people read that surah and they're like, wow, man, I should really like talk to my kids and explain to them, like, I should give advice to my son or my daughter. Like, let me talk to my children. Let me teach them, like, that is what the surah is doing. Like, the surah is a conversation between a parent and a child. We should walk away from that and be like, man, I should really teach my kids something. Like, let's go over the surah.
Man,
instead of like,
I should talk to my kids.
Who was Luqman? Was Luqman Aesop? Was he this? Was he like, instead of like,
that's exactly what happens though. Everybody's like, who was if you search Luqman into YouTube, you will see 100 videos about who was Luqman.
Yeah, exactly.
But you will never see
but not what is Luqman doing? What's happening here? Right?
Just go talk to your kids, bro.
Missing the forest for the trees, right? Am I wrong though? Am I wrong?
It's so true though. It's so true. Just go talk to your kids, bro.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good note to end on. But
it is.
Let's approach the Quran as what it is. Yeah.
Okay. So on that note, let's all go talk to our kids, inshallah. I unfortunately don't have any kids, but I can talk to my mother. She can talk to me.
You have your nieces as well. You have
unfortunately, my niece is still in Virginia, and I'm sitting in North Carolina.
Yeah. Well, call her on the phone.
Yeah.
We have this amazing technology now called the cell phone.
Oh, or Zoom.
Yes. Everything must be a Zoom meeting.
Zoom.
Send a Zoom link to your niece.
Oh yeah.
Can you confirm for this time?
Send.
Alhamdulillah.
Actually, she knows how to operate Zoom because her whole school is online.
SubhanAllah.
So she knows how to mute and turn the camera on and leave the meeting and all that.
Does she change her name to loading ... and then skip class?
So one of my cohort actually did that. He renamed himself. He was like, yeah.
Your
That's
name's
so
himself
great.
loading. Mashallah. Kids are so intuitive. I mean, I wish I could figure that out.
Yeah. Okay. Anyways, so that is our podcast slash live stream slash two guys talking.
Qalb al-Mu'min experience.
The experience of Qalb al-Mu'min, the heart of the believer, where inshallah we will be next Sunday at 2 p.m.
Yes.
We also have our YouTube channel. We are let me put that in. It is just well, actually, we don't have a URL for it yet. But let me link you to the video that Imam Omer made for the
Tips for connecting to the
tips
Quran.
for connecting with the Quran. He gave us 5 tips, not 4, not 3, 5 tips for connecting with the Quran.
Great number.
Yeah, it's a wonderful number. It's the magic number, in fact.
The 5 pillars. Oh my god.
Oh my god!
Mind
The 5
blown.
wow. The 5 pillars of connecting with the Quran, inshallah, where we will next week, inshallah, we will talk more about tips for improving your Ramadan, and make sure to check out the YouTubes, make sure to check out the Twitter, the Instagram, like, subscribe, share, follow, all that stuff.
We got to say this now. Social media. Like, share, subscribe.
Yes. And inshallah, we will see all of y'all next week. Thank you so much for joining us. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Assalamu alaikum.